Okay, so you want to own an underwater hotel. Glass walls with fish swimming past your bed, a private staircase leading down into the ocean, guests paying a small fortune for a night they'll never forget. That's the picture in your head, and it's not wrong. Underwater hotel rooms are some of the most expensive rooms on the planet, some going for $50,000 a night. Here's the problem. Almost none of that money is profit, and the reason why has nothing to do with the ocean view. Let's start with what it actually costs to put a room underwater in the first place, because the price tag here is unlike almost anything else in hospitality. A standard luxury hotel room costs somewhere in the range of $200,000 to $400,000 to build. An underwater room isn't a variation on that number. It's a completely different category of construction. The Muraka, a 2-level underwater villa at a resort in the Maldives, cost roughly $15 million to build, and that was for a single unit, not a hotel. One room. The lower level sits 5 meters below the surface of the Indian Ocean, sealed inside acrylic panels strong enough to withstand constant water pressure, while staying perfectly transparent for the guest sleeping 4 feet from a reef shark. Why does one room cost as much as an entire boutique hotel on land? The acrylic itself is the first answer. Standard glass can't be used for underwater viewing panels at this depth, because glass isn't flexible enough to handle the pressure without risking a catastrophic failure. You need cast acrylic, sometimes 10 to 20 centimeters thick, custom molded to the exact curve of the structure, and manufactured by a small handful of specialist companies in the world who can produce panels at this scale. A single curved acrylic viewing panel for a project like this can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars on its own, and you don't need just one. You need enough to wrap an entire room in glass that has to remain crystal clear for decades in salt water. Then there's the structure itself. You're not building on land and hoping it survives water exposure. You're building something that has to be assembled off-site, transported by barge, and sunk into position with millimeter-level precision. Because if the seal between the underwater section and the surface structure isn't perfect, you don't have a design flaw, you have a flood. Engineers have to account for tidal shifts, storm surges, and the simple fact that salt water corrodes almost everything given enough time. Every piece of metal touching that structure needs to be marine grade, which typically costs 2 to 3 times more than standard construction materials. Now, here's where the naive mental model really breaks down. You assume the expensive part is the build. It isn't. The expensive part is what it takes to keep that room alive every single day after it's built. An underwater room needs constant filtration and life support for the surrounding marine environment, because the entire selling point is a clear view of healthy coral and fish. And coral doesn't stay healthy near a structure unless you're actively managing water quality around it. That means dedicated marine biologists on staff, sometimes multiple, whose entire job is monitoring reef health, water clarity, and making sure the ecosystem outside the guest's window doesn't degrade from having a $5 million structure sitting on top of it. This isn't an optional luxury touch. If the reef around the room dies or the water turns murky, you don't have an underwater hotel room anymore. You have a very expensive basement. The acrylic itself needs constant cleaning too, and not the kind of cleaning a housekeeping staff can do. Algae and marine growth build up on the outside of the panels within days in warm tropical water. And if it's not cleared by trained divers on a regular schedule, your guest's 5-star ocean view slowly turns into a green haze. Add professional dive teams on payroll, specialized underwater cleaning equipment, and the fact that any panel maintenance has to happen without disturbing paying guests inside, and you've got a maintenance department that looks nothing like a normal hotel's. Let's talk about air and moisture control, because this is the part almost nobody outside the industry thinks about. A room sealed below sea level has completely different humidity and pressure dynamics than a room on land. The HVAC systems required to keep the space comfortable prevent condensation from fogging up the exact glass panels guests are paying to look through, and maintain safe air quality in a sealed underwater structure are custom engineered, not off-the-shelf units you can order from a hotel supply catalog. These systems run continuously. They're expensive to install, and when they fail, you can't just open a window. Here's the load-bearing question underneath this entire business. If a $5 million to $15 million structure only sleeps 2 to 4 guests a night, how does the math work at all? The answer is that it doesn't work as a standalone room. It works as a marketing engine for an entire resort. Underwater rooms almost never exist as their own business. They exist attached to a much larger property. A resort with 100 or more standard rooms, restaurants, spas, and villas, all charging normal luxury pricing. The underwater room itself might book for $10,000 to $50,000 a night, and even at those rates, spread across a $15 million build, plus years of specialized maintenance, marine biologist salaries, and dive team payroll. The room alone may take a decade or more to pay for itself, if it ever cleanly does on paper at all. What the underwater room actually generates is attention. It becomes the image every travel publication uses. It's the photo that goes everywhere online, the thing every other guest at the resort mentions wanting to see, even if they're staying in a regular villa 200 meters away. Occupancy across the entire resort tends to rise once a property has one of these rooms, because it repositions the entire brand as something extraordinary, and that lift in bookings across 100 normally priced rooms is where the real return on that $15 million actually shows up, not in the underwater room's own nightly rate. This is the same logic a car dealership uses when it puts a car with almost no profit margin on the showroom floor to get people in the door for the finance office. The underwater room is the loss leader. The rest of the resort is the business. Now, let's talk about what can go wrong, because the risks here are as unusual as the construction. Storm damage is the obvious one. A structure sitting partially underwater in a region prone to cyclones or hurricanes carries a level of insurance risk that standard hotel construction simply doesn't. Insuring a structure like this, if you can find an underwriter willing to take it on at all, comes with premiums far above what a conventional resort pays, and some owners have struggled to find full coverage for the underwater sections specifically, meaning a bad storm season can turn into a loss the insurance doesn't fully absorb. Then there's the ecosystem risk, and it cuts both ways. Coral bleaching events caused by rising ocean temperatures can devastate the exact reef the room was built to showcase, sometimes within a matter of weeks. A resort that spent $15 million building a room around a living coral reef has no direct control over whether that reef survives a marine heat wave. And when it doesn't, the signature feature of the entire investment can quietly disappear, leaving a technically functional but far less marketable room behind it. There's also the simple mechanical risk of running critical life support systems below sea level around the clock. A power failure that would be a minor inconvenience in a normal hotel room becomes a genuine safety and engineering emergency in a sealed underwater structure, which is why these rooms typically require redundant backup power systems, adding yet another layer of cost most guests never think about while they're admiring the view. So, does owning an underwater hotel room actually work as a business? On its own, almost never. Not in any time frame that would satisfy a normal investor looking at return on capital. In the optimistic scenario, the room becomes the centerpiece of a much larger, already profitable resort, drawing global media attention, lifting occupancy and average rates across every other room on the property, and slowly justifying its cost, not through its own nightly rate, but through what it does for the brand as a whole. In the realistic scenario, a storm damages the structure, a bleaching event kills the reef outside the window, or the specialized maintenance costs simply run higher than projected year after year, and the room becomes an expensive, high-maintenance asset that photographs beautifully and loses money quietly in the background, while the rest of the resort covers the gap. The underwater room was never really about the room. It was about buying the one image nobody else in the industry could copy, and betting that the attention it generates is worth more than the water it sits in.